So we left off talking about us now getting rid of everything. We're in our ADME era, right? So absorption, oh, I left my candy. I have it on my leg. So we're here now, we've used our drug, we're trying to figure out how we're gonna get rid of it. As we're getting rid of drugs, if somebody is taking more than one dose, right? So they're taking multiple doses of something, you'll see that elimination is happening while it's still metabolizing. So you kind of hit like this equilibrium of things that are going out while we have the stuff coming in, which is what we were calling our steady state, okay? So we'll talk more about that, but understand that elimination is constantly happening, and that if you're taking multiple drugs, you're not gonna fully eliminate that medication, right? Because I'm taking a new dose and it's gonna keep building, okay? So when we look at our GFR, this is the most accurate reading that you're gonna have on how our kidneys are doing. How fast is everything going through the kidney, getting filtered, and us eliminating them. But you won't see this on a lot of the package inserts that you look at for your medications. A lot of them are gonna use your creatinine clearance, okay? So just be aware that it's more accurate when you have your GFR, but typically what you're gonna see is gonna be the creatinine clearance. When you pull labs for your patients, they will automatically calculate that for you. Most of the time, you'll see it like in your lab results that you'll get every day for that patient. So keep an eye on it, because if you start to see somebody having like a kidney injury or something like that, their serum creatinine is gonna go up, and what you'll see with their creatinine clearance is it's gonna start to go down, okay? And then that may be for you to say like, hey, we might need to change this dose, especially if it's renally eliminated. I might need to do something with this dose, okay? So then you go in there, LexiComp, you'll look it up and you'll say, what dosage adjustment do I need to do right now? When patients have dialysis, dosing medications becomes a little bit more difficult because it depends on what days they have dialysis. You'll have somebody to help you with that. Pharmacy can also help you with that. But it's a lot more difficult because they're not clearing meds the same way, right? Because their kidneys aren't working. They have dialysis machines doing that for them. So they may have different dosing schedules that will not be typical for your normal patient, okay? So looking at this, just the basic terms. So we talked about your GFR. Your creatinine is just like the byproduct of waste of like your muscles. And so the metabolism that your muscles are going through, they will put off creatinine. And you'll see in your Cock-Galt equation, when we're calculating our creatinine clearance, you'll see a serum creatinine value. That will come from your labs that you're gonna pull for your patient, okay? So that's something that you should typically keep an eye out for. We already talked about creatinine clearance. So when you're looking at this, just understand that you're using that serum creatinine as a part of the equation. You're going to use the patient's gender as a part of the equation. Be mindful of this equation because it's an estimate. If you see that your patient is reacting a certain way or experiencing side effects that are typical of a medication, especially whenever they're having a higher dose of a medication, then take that into account, that like, hey, maybe my equation isn't right, and try to look more so at their GFR, okay? Some races, like African Americans, the thought is that this may not be very accurate because of potentially having more muscle mass. And so that's where you see the MDRD calculation, because it accounts for if someone is African American, then it's supposed to be more reflective of what their GFR may actually look like. In my career, I have never used the MDRD equation except for in pharmacy school. So that lets you know how much people actually use it. And as you get used to practicing, you know what you're looking for, and it's typically fine and not that big of a deal as to you needing to do the MDRD equation. Okay, so a big thing from here is looking at your Cock-Galt formula, and you can remember the numbers or you can remember what goes into this equation. This is a very important equation, so I do want you to know this is probably one of the only equations that I tell you to know. So, what I mean by knowing it is you're not going to have to calculate a creatinine clearance, but if I told you that the serum creatinine went up, what are you going to expect to happen with their creatinine clearance? Is it going to go up or down? Down, right? So like when I say remember the equation, I'm telling you to like remember the relationships, okay? So if I'm older, right, it's very likely that my serum creatinine or my creatinine clearance, is it going to be higher or lower? Probably lower, right, than if I'm a younger person, okay? So looking at essentially how to manipulate this equation, if I give you like a scenario and I ask you about their serum creatinine, if I ask you about their weight. So for some people, it's easier for them to just remember the equation, the 140 minus their age times their weight, which has to be in kilograms. And then if it's a female, we have to multiply by 0.85 for them, and then you're gonna divide all of that by 72 times their serum creatinine, okay? And that will give you the creatinine clearance. Now, it's important to remember the multiplication of the 0.85 for the female, so just know that like there's something extra that you have to do if it is a woman. Be very mindful that this equation is based off of, they had non-obese, all of the people that they based the equation off of were males, and they were all white males, okay? So this is like what we're basing everything off of for the entire population, okay? So again, it's not as accurate if you are looking at your GFR, okay? Yes.
Just to confirm, one of the big things you want us to gather from this was GFR and creatinine clearance are inversely proportionate. Like when one goes up, the other one goes down.
No, that's serum creatinine.
Serum.
All right, yes, serum creatinine, which is the same thing as creatinine, but when you pull a lab value, we call it serum creatinine. Those are inverse of each other. So in the denominator of your creatinine clearance equation, SCR is essentially your serum creatinine value. Those are inverse of each other.
So
Okay.
and if serum creatinine goes up, then GFR is probably down, or
Creatinine clearance.
creatinine clearance.
Yes. You could also say GFR. So here's, GFR is like your gold standard, very accurate, usually spot on. Your creatinine clearance is typically a little bit lower than what your actual GFR will be. But it's a good estimate, and this is what we use a lot in medicine, is your creatinine clearance. So that equation that you see down there. Your serum creatinine is the metabolism and the waste from your muscles that we use to calculate, and it is inverse of, yes, both of those things. Yes. For the yes.
So the larger patient is, the higher clearance rate they have.
So that's why this thing sometimes when you think about it, and that's why I told you that we didn't look at non-obese. So typically, and I'm not gonna make y'all do this, we would calculate their ideal body weight and put that weight into this equation to calculate it. So what would that person's ideal body weight be? Y'all aren't doing that. I just want you to be familiar with what the equation looks like. But there are modifications that we have for what their kidneys should be doing to calculate their creatinine clearance. But if they're obese, we use their ideal body weight. Okay, we good? All right. Oh, come on, don't do it. All right. This is an example of how you can use that creatinine clearance equation to adjust a dose that you have for a patient. Don't remember this, not asking you about this right now. But what I'm wanting you to look at is like, okay, I have levofloxacin as my drug that I'm using, okay? Antibiotic, and I have a patient and I get their creatinine clearance and I'm like, their creatinine clearance is not great. So if I'm looking over here on my left-hand side, these are my creatinine clearance values, right? So I told you if somebody is on dialysis, we do different things depending on what type of dialysis they're on. And then these are your creatinine clearance values that you got. So this is what spit out after you did your equation, okay? It would be in one of these ranges. So anything that's greater than or equal to 50, I don't need to do anything at all with that dose. I'm gonna leave it alone. But if I had my person and they said, hey, their creatinine clearance is less than 20, then you see here what this is saying now is instead of giving them 250 every 24 hours, now I'm giving them 250 milligrams every 48 hours. Okay? So this is what you, like something that you would see if you look up their creatinine clearance or their dosage adjustment. So understand you use the creatinine clearance to see if I need to dose adjust. You see that if it's not ideal, that that doesn't always mean you have to change the dose. Sometimes it's fine. It has to get to a certain degree to where you're saying like, okay, I need to change the dose. And so the way that we combat that, we'll change either the dose, like how much we're giving them, or we'll change the frequency. You can see either of those typically happen whenever we're talking about a creatinine clearance adjustment. So like in this one, they're doing every other day instead of them doing it every day, but the dose is still the same. Yes?
Yeah, so on a previous slide, it says like normal someone between 90 and 140.
Right.
If you see someone sitting like between 20 and 50, is that saying they have something else?
Yeah, they have poor kidneys. They suck. The kidneys, not the person, their kidneys suck, right? So when you're looking at this, yes. But like I said, this will vary for every single drug. Some drugs, their serum creatinine or their creatinine clearance cutoff might be higher. So if they see something that drops below 60, 80, they might need a dosage adjustment. But just this example, they didn't.
They're not in failure to.
Yeah, this person's pretty bad, but yeah, they're not in failure. Battery went dead. Yes? Yes.
Will charts like this be found like on Lexicon?
Yes. You're not expected to remember stuff like this. Like, unless it's something that you deal with all the time, you won't know this. So a lot of the pharmacists that I work with will look it up, but like a lot of the ICU pharmacists that I work with, because people are on the same exact meds, a lot of people end up on dialysis, in comas, stuff like that, they know like this off the top of their head because they use these same drugs every single day. So they're like, oh, we need to dose adjust. Go look it up. Okay, great. So, but you're not expected to know this. I just want you to know what you're looking at and how to read it when you do see it, okay? Always, 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 creatinine clearance, when you see that and you start to see it dropping, or if you see that your person is not like steady, every day, get it before you dose something, especially if you know that it's renally dosed, okay? Always check that. All right, half-life. Don't need you guys to remember these equations for the half-life. What I want you to understand is that it depends on their volume of distribution and that clearance. And so remember that we have different things that can affect our half-life, right? So if I'm older, my clearance is probably not as good, so that may affect my half-life. Certain disease states may affect my half-life. If I'm heavier, that might affect my half-life. If I have more protein binding around, that might affect the half-life of my drug. So think about all the different things that can affect your volume of distribution and all the different things that could potentially affect your clearance. If they affect either of those things, then your half-life will be affected. Other than that, you can expect for your half-life to be left alone. You can change anything else that you want. You can change the dose, you can change anything, your half-life will be the same, okay? So anything that affects your clearance or your VD is what we're worried about when we're talking about our half-life. And half-life is exactly, the definition of it is exactly what it sounds like, right? So the time that it's gonna take for your body to get rid of 50% of that drug that you put in, okay? So that concentration is going down by 50% every single time, all right? Again, don't remember these equations. So this is just a picture showing you essentially like what you're looking at with half-life. I don't need y'all to remember this. I'm not going to give you a picture on this. But essentially naproxen is showing you here that it has a longer half-life than when you're looking at ibuprofen, which is hitting here at this 12-hour mark. Don't worry about it. Nice picture for you to see. Okay, this is a big idea, and this is one that you're going to have to remember. Because we talk about steady state all the time and kind of understanding what steady state is. So when you get to steady state, that's like that equilibrium that I was talking to you about. When we're talking about steady state, this is not a medication that you're giving a patient one time, okay? Usually they're taking several doses and we're keeping that concentration. We're trying to build it up to a steady state, okay? So just think about like small deposits to get us to like invest in our body or in ourselves, and we just want to keep it right there, right? We're just trying to say like, okay, how can I get you at a steady state? Essentially, everything that is getting eliminated is also coming back in and getting distributed and metabolized, okay? So that's why the line, it looks straight and we draw it straight. In reality, it's kind of like this, right? But it's actually, on our pictures, it's just a straight line, right? It's never gonna be 100%, but it's close. So y'all already answered that for me before. 4 to 5 half-lives for us to reach steady state, and then it's the same amount of time for that drug to get washed out of their body. So it'll take 4 to 5 half-lives once they take that last dose of that medication for it to be completely out of their body, or at a very minute amount, okay? When you're looking at this, just the big idea that I want you to know about is the 4 to 5 half-lives, and then looking at this example down here for us to go over that. So if the drug exhibits first order kinetics, has a half-life of 7 hours, how long will it take to get to steady state if the infusion rate is 30 milligrams per hour? So you don't need this, has nothing to do with what we're asking about, right? Because that rate, none of that matters. I'm worried about how many half-lives. And I have to look at that 4 to 5 times whatever I told you that time was for their half-life, which is the 7 hours, okay? So again, when you're reading questions, pay attention to what you're being asked and don't try to add things to your problem, okay? So steady state is specifically dealing with that 4 to 5 half-life. So once you know the half-life of that drug, you can calculate how long it's gonna take for that drug to get to steady state. Okay, so that's all this is saying. You got an extra piece of information in here to just kind of throw you off. We don't care about the infusion rate. That's not affecting how long it's gonna take for you to get to steady state. Okay. All right. So looking at concentration. When we're talking about concentration, we kind of went over this already when we said our IV, our F is what? 1, right? 100%, I'm getting that drug where I need it to go. So my concentration is already with that, almost essentially at 100% of what I gave them, right? And then over time, as it continues to go through ADME, it's going to start to decline. Now, if I don't give another dose here, this is going to continue to go out of that person's body, right? We're washing it out. But I can give them another dose, I'm gonna see this peak back up again, and that's how you start to see those charts where you're looking and it's like that, right? And we're doing that based off of all of the different PK parameters that they looked at when they developed the drug to say, all right, when do I give another dose? When do I not fall below that minimum inhibitory or minimum effective concentration, okay? So that's what we're looking at when we're looking at these. When we're looking at an infusion, it is different from an injection. So when we're talking about an infusion, that's when you hook them up to a line, okay? And you're starting to infuse that drug over time. So you're slowly getting that accumulation happening, all right? So think about like you're running some type of drip, okay? So this is like, it was off, you hook your patient up, and then you turn on your pump, and then it starts to go up, because your drug is starting to accumulate. And then the same thing will happen after 4 to 5 half-lives. You're gonna reach your steady state, right, if your drug is still on. You turn your drug off, it's gonna go back down, right? Because now I'm not putting anything in anymore, and I'm just eliminating. And then you'll have to calculate and wait again for that drug to get to steady state if you turned it off, okay? So when we change a dose or when we do anything like that, you have to wait again that 4 to 5 half-lives for us to reach steady state, because now you've thrown everything off, okay? All right, this is looking at accumulation again. And just understanding that this is if you're giving more than one dose. There's very few drugs where we're like, all right, you have one dose and that's it. Most of the time, you're gonna give several doses for a patient. So in this, and I'm gonna read it word for word, if the dosing interval is shorter than 4 half-lives, then the accumulation of the drug will be detectable, okay? As long as you're continuing to give it, you're gonna see that accumulation happening. If you stop giving it, you're not gonna see that happen, okay? It's not gonna be, you'll see some of the drug in there, but you're not gonna see it at its maximum peak, right? Because it never reached steady state. You're gonna see it though, it'll be detectable, you'll see it there, but it's not gonna be like, if you continue to give it for the 4 to 5 half-lives, it won't be at that point, okay? It'll be lower, all right? And then remember, always, as you're having accumulation, you're still having elimination happening, but now we have our straight line because we reached steady state, Okay, so after that 4 to 5 half-lives hit, we're like, okay, we're cool, we're just cruising, we're on cruise control now. Unless we stop taking a med, then I drop back down. And then I have to build that back up again before I'm back in cruise control, okay? All right, this is looking at your concentration again, and then looking at 2 different drugs, right? So this drug, I've given them one time that day. So this is 24 hours down here. So you see, I gave them a medication, they took it, starting to go through that elimination. I gave them another dose, they took it, and as you can see, there's still residual medication in the body, so there's still a little bit of accumulation that's happening, okay? So this peak here is lower than this one. Very minor, but if you look closely at it, you'll see that there's a difference in between those 2 peaks, okay? Because I didn't wait until this got all the way to 0. So now I have something that I'm building up on. So think of it as like steps, okay? But the reason why we see the concentration in this one higher than this one is because I'm giving this more frequent. So now I'm going up my steps quicker, right? Because I don't have as much elimination. I'm not starting from a more negative number, so to speak. I have more drug now to build on top of. Versus when I waited and I gave it to them one time that day, I gave the body 24 hours essentially to eliminate that drug without pouring anything back into the cup. Versus here, every 8 hours, I was giving them another dose. So I wasn't able to continue to pour out my cup. Before I could empty it, I was pouring more into the top. So now I'm just stacking on top of each other. So this concentration, giving it more often, is higher than when I was not giving it as often. Okay? So that's essentially what this is saying about the half-life and how they were dosing this medication. So see, it's saying the top one, essentially, 1 half-life, which was 6 hours, and then the bottom one, they were giving it every 4 half-lives, so then 4 times 6, because the half-life was 6, then every 24 hours. So that's just showing you the difference between doing it that way. It looks like 8, there's 6. Okay, yes?
So even though it has the little curves at the top one, it still reaches steady state, technically?
After it hits 4 to 5, so like somewhere around here, this would have been, you see how this starts to flatten out? This is saying now it's at steady state. But this is where I was telling you how we draw it like this because we said it's at 4 to 5, when in reality it is fluctuation. This kind of is what it looks like. Think about this as super zoomed in though. Because when we draw it later, you're gonna see a straight line. Okay? Yes?
What is the MSC and the PBC?
So that's the maximum serum concentration and the minimum effective concentration that we have. So essentially that's your therapeutic window, right? If I go over my MSE, different people will sometimes use different terms, but if I go over my max or my top concentration, toxicity, and if I'm below this, I'm not effective. My drug is probably not working. So this is your therapeutic window right here, where you want your drug to stay somewhere in between here. All right? You good? Okay. Let's keep going. All right. So when we're looking at this, again, when you're seeing these 2 drugs, the difference is I'm dosing this quite often, right? I'm giving them this every 2 hours. When you're looking at the bigger ones here, I'm giving that 350 milligrams now every 8 hours, okay? This is just showing you that, and this is what I was telling you on the previous slide, they called it MSC. Here you're gonna see Cmax and Cmin, same thing, and then this would be your therapeutic window in between these 2 things, okay? So this is represented as MSC and MEC. This is the same exact thing, Cmax and Cmin. All right, so this is still in our therapeutic window. All right. So when you're looking at this, I'm giving them smaller doses more frequently versus giving them a bigger dose less frequently, right? I have accumulation happening in both of these things, and they're reaching steady state at the same exact time because it's the same exact drug, okay? Same exact drug means that it has the same exact what?
Half-life.
Has the same exact half-life, right? If I don't tell you that I changed anything with their clearance, if I don't tell you that I changed anything with their VD, they're still getting there at the same exact time, okay? What you see though, is that me giving these bigger doses, I have a higher Cmax, my concentration is more because I'm giving a little bit more medication than this patient that I gave the 90 milligrams to every 2 hours. Okay, so it's accumulating, it's still accumulating, but it's just not at the same rate, like the elimination isn't the same, and because the dose is different, you have two factors that you're playing against, and it's a smaller dose. Yes?
Ma'am, for drugs with narrow therapeutic windows, then is it better to give smaller doses more frequently so you don't get those big spikes?
So it depends. I have seen where because we are sending a patient home on a medication that's like that, and they're getting infusions at home, because there are options, like we have people who are long-term, like they're ill, they wanna go home, they don't wanna stay in the hospital, or it's bad for them to be in the hospital because they're immunocompromised. We do what's called OPAT, and we'll send them home, and we have infusion people go out there and do it. We do sometimes, but you have to be careful, right, because I still can't go over my Cmax, where we will give them a higher dose so that the person isn't going out there every couple of hours, right? So we'll go closer to our Cmax than we typically would, where we're typically on those drugs, we try to stay in the middle. There's also sometimes when we'll use those drugs if somebody is like really sick, and we're trying to get them under control, we may push that like Cmax, we'll be closer to it versus playing it safe where we're in the middle. We do that sometimes with antibiotics too, where like we'll say, hey, I know, like vancomycin, I know that they're probably gonna have like some ringing in the ears, but I'm about to bust the Cmax because they're super sick and we gotta load them. So we'll do certain things like that sometimes, but not often. So yes, this is definitely something that it can vary. Your answer that you love, yes.
Then what's keeping it at steady state? Are we altering the dose, or is it just their body eliminating it in that area? Like, what's keeping the drug from just exponentially climbing as we give a dose?
Because you hit equilibrium, is essentially what it is.
Elimination
So the
versus
the elimination versus it going in. So then that's why you're at your line and it's no longer accumulating, because now I'm like, okay, cool, used to this drug, it's in my body, got it, we're right here. So it's just kind of doing this. It keeps going across. Yes.
If you prescribe the medication with a loading dose and then a maintenance dose,
Mhm.
is the goal to achieve this faster with less?
The goal is to get them into that therapeutic window faster, but it's not gonna make them reach steady state faster. Because my VD, it has my half-life gotten affected. My half-life hasn't changed. So that's where everybody gets confused and we're gonna talk about it. But you're trying to get me to where this drug is working quicker. It's not necessarily saying that I'm at steady state any quicker. Okay?
That makes sense.
That's the good part. But that's kind of, yes.
When would this be like clinically relevant? Would it be more like in hospital versus out of hospital situation?
Most of the time, yes, and whenever you have a patient coming back in and they keep missing their doses, and they're telling you that their medication isn't working.
Like a Z-pack. Take 2 pills up. Take 2
That's the
pills.
loading dose.
Yeah, take 2 pills up front and then 1 pill 4 days after.
So that's a good example of like a loading dose, a common one that y'all will use. But like outpatient wise, whenever I tell y'all to talk to your patient, make sure that your patient is doing what they're supposed to do. This is why, right? Because you're thinking, hey, I'm bringing you back after a month so I can get good labs. It depends on the drug. Sometimes it might be sooner. Sometimes you can say come back in 3 months. But I'm trying to make sure that they're at steady state, right? If you're not at steady, you should be at steady state if you're taking your meds. If you are not taking your meds and you're telling me that it's not working, it's probably because you're not in your therapeutic window. You're taking it every other day, so now you're falling below it. This is super important when we talk about like antibiotics and compliance and therapeutic failure. This is a big reason why. People will stop taking their meds because they feel better, or they will forget to take it every 8 hours, and then they'll load up 2 in the beginning. I'll take 2 in the morning, I'm not gonna take it while I'm at work, and then I'll take 1 at home. So now, us trying to build them up the right way is not happening. It's not accumulating correctly. So you just doubled your dose in the morning, eliminated more of that drug because you weren't able to use it. It has a half-life. And then now, your second dose that you're supposed to take, you missed it. So now you're falling below probably your CBD. And so it's important inpatient, we monitor it more closely inpatient, but outpatient, this is like the theory behind why you're telling people to take it every 8 hours. So when you write your prescription, I don't like to see, and I know that sometimes I change them. Whenever somebody writes, take 3 times a day, instead of writing, take it every 8 hours. You write every 8 hours, I'm likely to take it every 8 hours. You tell me take it 3 times a day, I might take one at 8 o'clock, I'm gonna take the next one at 10 o'clock, and then I'm gonna take the next one at 1500, because that's when I felt like taking it, right? Blows this whole thing out of the water. So instead of writing 3 times a day, 2 times a day, a lot of the times, like when I see it come in the pharmacy, I'll be like, every 12 hours, every 8 hours, so that the person knows this is, you're taking it, because they'll take them together. Yes, and then hold on, here's one person back. Yes.
So is that the reason why you drive in trough when you're eating vancomycin to see if they reach steady state?
So you're doing it for that, you're also doing it to make sure that what we calculated is actually what their body is doing, right? Because my body may not do what I thought it was gonna do on paper. So we continue to pull those and also to make sure that we're in that therapeutic range, because when we go out of it, we have nasty things happening. So yes, that is a part of the reason why we're doing that with those, yeah. Yes.
So I guess, is this more for like a therapeutic? Cause like when you give someone an antibiotic for 5 days, how do you get to the steady state? Cause it's so quick.
So with that, when you're looking at, those are a little bit different because they have done studies to see how long it's gonna take for us to kill whatever that bug is. And some of our antibiotics have like post-antibiotic effect to where I don't have to take it every day because the drug is still lingering in my body and doing its action. So I guess try to keep it a little bit set, like there's several, this is black and white, right? But depending on the drug, it varies. I could have one that I could take one time and it has effect 2 or 3 days after I took that one pill, right? So then the idea of multiple dosing and accumulation isn't happening, but it's still killing at a concentration that is effective to kill my bug, so I didn't have to take another dose.
So you can get to the therapeutic range, but you'll probably never reach steady
Steady
state.
state,
Because
correct, 2 separate things.
Okay.
2 separate ideas. I was just orienting you to the graph because y'all see different words on different pictures because we want to confuse you. Because there's several different ways to express it. All right, so when we're talking about this and we're talking about the concentration, another way that you can look at this is you can look at this top number, right, 90 times every 2 hours, so they're giving it 12 times a day. So if you did the math on that, I think it's, where did I put it? Let me look and see if I have it all the way up here. 1,080 milligrams, okay, if you were doing this one, versus if you were doing the 350 times 8, that's 1050. So that's why you see like this isn't a huge difference because it's only 30 milligrams. It's not a huge difference between the top and the bottom. That steady state is very similar because the dosing, the total daily dose is very similar. Okay, so it's not that big of a difference. It's just a convenience thing at that point. And so does the time to reach steady state change with concentration? No, and that's kind of like what we were talking about or hitting on with that loading dose question. So here, this is a very important thing that we sometimes play with also. So if the dose or dosing interval of the drug is altered, the time required for the drug to reach steady state is the same, which is what we were just talking about, but the plasma concentration is going to change. All right? If I'm giving them, so in this situation here, Equal doses of the same drug are given every 6 hours, which is this one, and every 8 hours, which is this one, right? I can see on this top picture that I gave them shorter intervals. So the shorter the interval, the higher, a little bit higher, this is like amplified, but the higher, and we didn't tell you how much of each one, the higher that steady state is versus looking at this one, okay? They're gonna be close to each other though, because it's still the same drug, still the same half-life. But because I'm giving it more frequently, my ability to stack before I reach my steady state was higher in the drug that I gave more often than the one that I didn't give as often, okay? So they're close to each other, they're not exactly the same, but it's a negligible amount. But your concentration of your more frequent dosing is gonna be higher. Think about going up the steps quicker versus taking a little bit longer to get there. I shouldn't say it that way because then you're gonna think about time. Think about I got higher in the same amount of time than if I were giving it less often, increasing up steps less frequently, okay? So that's essentially what it's saying. So when we talk about steady state, as long as your half-life is the same, you're gonna reach steady state at the same exact time, as long as it's the same drug. Now, if I told you that my renal function was messed up, or that I was 90 years old, that's different, right? So you gave me drug A and you all had drug A. But I told you that I'm 90 and you are 20, and I also have a creatinine clearance of 40 and yours is at 120, right? It's not gonna be the same for us. Now the time for me to reach steady state is gonna take me a little bit longer to get there, okay? So my half-life is affected, it's gonna change things. That's all I need you to know. I'm not gonna ask you which way it's gonna be. Just know that if I don't change your half-life, I'm not changing that 4 to 5 half-lives to get to steady state. 4 to 5 is your number for steady state. Okay? Now, looking at this was that picture that we just saw, and we're gonna see another one that I like a little bit better. But if you don't have an interval or a shorter interval, you're gonna have less fluctuation, right? Because I'm giving it more frequently. I don't have time to, like if I gave a dose, I'm gonna wait for my peak, right, to happen, and then I'm gonna go down. And then I give another dose, and then I'm gonna go down. Versus if I keep giving you doses, I'm going like this, right? I don't have time to drop down. I don't have that elimination happening. So no interval or a shorter interval, you have less fluctuation, where if you have a longer interval, you're gonna have more fluctuation, right? So think about if you eat very often, right? If you're eating every 2 hours, you're not likely to be very hungry. Versus if you're eating once a day, right? The fluctuation of eating that one time a day, you're like, whew, here's that one meal. And then you're just going like this, you're eliminating, you're going to the bathroom, you go poop, you're not drinking anything, right? Versus that person who's like, oh, I ate breakfast, oh, I need a snack, oh, I'm drinking water. They're eliminating still, but they're putting something back into that cup, right? So this is the same thing. If I have shorter intervals, or no interval at all, and I just eat all day, less fluctuation. Longer intervals, more fluctuation, all right? So regardless of the average plasma concentration, it's gonna be the same, all right? So again, Cmax, Cmin is typically what you will see used, but the MEC, MSC is also a different thing that you can see. So this is the chart that I was looking at and telling you about. So you see that you have like your peak or your Cmax, and then your trough, which is your Cmin. And then this one is every 24 hours, the big one, right? I'm giving a large dose, and then my body is getting rid of it. I give another large dose, and it's getting rid of it, and give another large dose. And then you have every 8 hours, this is super shifted, every 8 hours should be to this one right here, okay? And then you have where I'm continuously giving it, right? So there's no interval. So here I have less fluctuation. Here I have a little bit more, but it's not as drastic as if I were giving it less often, okay? So same theory that we just talked about, just with a lot of words, all right? So if you want to minimize fluctuation, do I give it more often or less often? If I want to minimize fluctuation, more often, all right? That's all these two slides are saying. There are some drugs where we will give it more often because we don't want to get them close to that peak. And then there are certain situations where I'll say, hey, I know I'm getting close to my Cmax. I'm going to give them this bigger dose though, and then that way I don't have to dose them again until tomorrow. Or if they're inpatient and lines are tied up and you can't run your drug how you want to run your drug, this may be one of those things that you have to do sometimes with your antibiotics. You'll give them that bigger dose and then you have to wait your turn again, okay? And then you can do it again. So a lot of different ways for you to manipulate all the things that you're going to be able to prescribe, all right? Maintenance dose. This is what we were talking about a little bit before, but a maintenance dose is essentially given to like hold that steady state where we're giving it, where we wanted it to be, all right? So a maintenance dose does not apply to you giving something one time. This is something that somebody is going to be on for a long period of time. So again, think about once you put cruise control on, right? You're having to continuously press the gas till you get to that speed that you want to be at. When you press that button, the car is essentially maintaining that speed for you. This is you taking those repeated doses, giving your patient those repeated doses so they can stay at that concentration, they can stay at that steady state, all right? Yes.
So, the class 2 drugs that you can do the 90 for maintenance, the intent is they're gonna come and see that provider again in order, they're gonna need another prescription.
Yes. They always need another prescription. They're always gonna come and see you. So yes, there are some ways that, like, I've seen some providers like combat it. They'll write the prescription and then they future the date. Cannot be filled until. So they'll give the Adderall, they'll write for one prescription and they give them another prescription. They'll be like, this one is the first one, and they'll have that date to be dispensed today. And then the next one, they can't dispense it until 30 or 90 days, depending on how that provider wants to do it after. But yes, they will have to come in and get those prescriptions from you every single time. All right, so my maintenance dose, I want to maintain what I did. I'm trying to keep them steady, all right, cruise control. Now, this is what we were talking about with the loading dose. If I want to get there quickly, I want to get them into my window quickly. I need to get them above that min quickly. I want this to work. They're sick, help. This is what we were talking about doing our loading dose, and this is where we can also increase how fast. If you don't have if a drug does not have a loading dose, you can also play with the infusion rate. So how quickly now can I speed up this infusion to get more drug into their body quicker? That concentration is going to rise quicker, but again, it's still taking me 4 to 5 half-lives to get to steady state. But my concentration is now above that C-min. I'm in my therapeutic window, I'm working. I'm killing whatever it is that you wanted me to crush, right? I'm killing the bugs, the bacteria, whatever it is that they have, all right? So a drug with a half-life of 7 hours is infused at a rate of 30 milligrams per hour to get the desired concentration of 10 milligrams per liter. If you increase the rate to 60 milligrams, will you get to steady state faster? That's what we were just talking about. No, but my concentration has now, since I doubled it, right? I doubled my rate. Now my concentration has doubled because I doubled how fast I was putting it into their body. Okay, so that's all this calculation is showing you here. Right? Still 4 to 5 half-lives to get to steady state. Loading dose. Okay. Again, same idea as to what we just talked about with doubling the infusion. I'm now putting more of the medication into their body so that they can get to that therapeutic window faster, alright? Still not getting to steady state any quicker, okay? So, the idea here is like, I'm just trying to make sure that my patient is being treated quickly. Not every drug has a loading dose. Okay, some drugs have loading doses, some don't. The one that you're gonna touch very, very frequently, if you're outpatient, is a good example is Z-Pack. Inpatient, a lot of the times you'll see with some of our antibiotics, we'll do a loading dose, especially vancomycin, you do a loading dose on almost every single time for your patient. And then their maintenance dose gets dropped. But we hit them hard most of the time. If you need vanc, you're sick. So we hit them with a loading dose, and then we'll start their maintenance, okay? So big idea here, what I want you to understand is that you're getting them to a concentration faster, but it's not necessarily that you're gonna help them get to the steady state any faster, because VD hasn't changed, half-life hasn't changed, okay, of that drug. All right, drug monitoring, looking at this is just telling you about absorption, distribution, clearance, understanding that you can get different labs to see if your patient is being adherent. You wanna make sure that they don't have any abnormalities. Some people have like where they have done weight loss surgeries. We have some people who have bowel obstructions, bowel diseases. So all of these different things will affect the absorption, thinking about it, of a medication. When you look at VD, we kind of touched on these already, but more fluid in our elderly patients, less muscle. So just thinking about that, they may have a smaller VD, but if they have like liver disease, which is also common in your elderly patients, you can see where that VD gets increased. So just pay attention to your patient as a whole. Look at them. What is happening to them? What can affect this medication that I'm giving them? Okay? If they're not like normal, healthy, good labs coming back, your mind is thinking, okay, how do I alter this dose if I need to? And you go and you look that up to see if you need to. As we go through our classes, what you'll see is like, there are certain ones where I'm gonna say like, hey, you need to remember that this is a renally dosed drug. We'll talk about that a lot with antibiotics. Okay, because a lot of your patients are gonna be sick in the hospital and their renal function is gonna vary while they're sick. Okay, so then you're gonna need to make sure you don't have to dose adjust that antibiotic. One day, you're gonna walk in and your patient's gonna be fine, and the next day you're gonna be like, what happened? And you're gonna have to change doses on several meds, okay? So just keep an eye out for it. Your clearance, again, if they have any type of impairment, making sure how your drug is eliminated, do I need to alter anything because of that? And then understanding your half-life can vary depending on your patient, right? What's going on with my patient? What are the things that are affecting half-life? Does my patient have any of those things, okay? So, patient as a whole, figuring out what you need to do with them to help them. All right, and looking a little bit now at our pharmacodynamics, this is talking about, actually let's just take our 10-minute break. 10 minutes, okay, so we'll start back at 11. Y'all asked a lot of questions this time. We failed in an hour.
There's two separate lists. And also the Botox, you just have Botox, like traditional Botox listed, but then you have a chart of like different Botox. Okay.
So talk about why, talk about the structure, talk about it.
I'm trying to think like a master list, like just should I just include all of them or just one list on the chart?
I'll tell you what to do in classes, so you know how I feel like and what it is to do out my questions, so I'm trying to try to break out. I don't write my exam. Sometimes. So, which part?
Yeah, that one.
So,
There's a slide like 5 or 6 back, you have just
So like, so they go, and I'm like, oh, yeah, now I'm have to go down and grab some Subway for lunch.
And then bring it over, then I recognize it and know how it works. The effect I guess
Not.
yeah, I'm just making my mouth look like I
So
don't
yeah,
want
this
But
Sadly, we have haven't tried it.
no, because like the one I was looking at was down here. So like it was your graph and it was really like right up here, but it frozen. It's on iOS.
I'll start buying these.
Yeah, we're working on it. She was like, there's a collar there. Looks good.
How do I kernels in pediatrics and we do transgender? Like human culture. And they do sometimes, they grow up and they're like, I wish I didn't do that.
It should be. Yeah, and that's.
I think there's like individual stories. Like people that did it early on. Yeah. I think if they want to like address it that way, that's fine, that's not. Like, let's wait till like 18. Yeah, and you're fully developed.
But they
You're somewhat developed.
you consider an adult by now.
I could get one of those jobs. There are some really bad jobs. Yeah, you know what I mean? I think you can go. I can get mine.
I'm also, I don't like a lot of things.
I got a win.
Well, yeah, yeah.
Jobs and
My brain was technique. It's
Let's get started. Okay, so this is looking at our concentration, response, relationships, and you just like some terminology that you're looking at, and some of this we already talked about. So a few that I want to point out would be looking at your potencies, right? So this is, am I getting the response that I want, and how much drug do I have to do to get that? Okay, so how potent does something need to be? And then with some of our drugs, you'll see like we require a lower dose, they're a little bit more potent, right? I don't need that much of it. You'll see that some of our patients will give them a little small whiff of a drug and they will like dramatically respond to it, okay? Because it's a potent medication. So when we're looking at this, you're looking at EC50. And so this is where 50% of the drug is gonna elicit or give you that maximum response that you're expecting to see from that medication, potency. When we're looking at efficacy, this is like, is my drug doing what I want it to do, and again, if I manipulate the medication, or if I'm looking at the potency or the dose that I can give them, I may be able to see more or less efficacy in the drug, depending on the dose that I've given them, okay? So efficacy is the maximum response that would be produced by the drug that you give your patient. We'll look at a picture that kind of makes it a little bit better, but the greater your Emax, the better your drug is performing, the better the efficacy, okay? Looking at your effectiveness, did it do what I wanted it to do, okay? Hopefully it does. So effectiveness and efficacy are, you'll hear them sometimes used interchangeably, but they're not necessarily the same exact thing, okay? When we're looking at our efficacy, we're talking about Emax, where effectiveness is just like, did it work? Yes or no, okay? Not a certain amount of drug that it took to do what I wanted it to do. So efficacy is more important than potency, right? If my drug is not doing what I needed it to do, it doesn't matter how potent it is. That doesn't matter. You still didn't do what I needed you to do. That's what I tell my husband. Just kidding. All right, so your graded response, right? This is just, again, terminology that you may hear. You may see this in some studies, and when you're reading studies, you'll see different things kind of written like this. So a graded response is something that's going to be for like a continuous variable, or your quantal response is like kind of more like a yes or a no. It's like the all or nothing, right? So when you're looking at a graded response, blood pressure, right? It's on this huge continuum. Think about like the temperature in a refrigerator, okay? Huge continuum, graded response. When you're looking at this, you could also be like, oh, I gave them more drug, I got more of a response, okay? So this is like a big continuum of possibilities. When you're looking at your quantal response, did you die? Yes or no? If you're in front of me, the answer is clearly no, right? There's no gray, I guess you could, but there's no gray area in there, okay? There's no gray area. Did you have a seizure? Yes or no? So these are very like, did this happen? Did this not happen? I didn't kind of have one, like yes or no. Is that a mango? It's killing me. Oh, I love mango. Sorry. It's okay. Eat your mango. I'm jealous. All right. So then looking at this, I told you that we have a graph. Sorry. I told you that we have a graph, and it'll kind of make a little bit more sense, right? So let me get my laser again. So we have our Emax, our EC50 is here, and then we're talking about our graded responses, right? Because with our graded responses, this was like, we have several different ways that we could answer this. So your Emax is going to be the maximum response that you can get. Doesn't necessarily mean that it always has to be at 100. A drug's Emax can be at any, bless you, one of these numbers, right? That's particular to that drug. Okay, so don't feel like it always has to be 100. As long as it's giving its 100%, okay, that's its maximum effect, right? So that's your Emax, your EC50, we talked about that, right? 50% of the maximum that you're gonna get. So this makes it easy for us, the fact that it's 100, right? Because it's at 50. So this is gonna be their EC50 right here. And then when you're looking at your questions that you could potentially get from something like this, right? Efficacy is like, is it effective? Is it doing what I needed it to do? Did it get there, right? Yeah, it got there. But potency is gonna probably get me there a little bit faster, right? So if I look at this, they all have similar maximum responses, efficacy, right? Because they all got up here to 100, but they have different potencies. And you know that they have different potencies because who got there first? I'm more potent if I'm drug A because I reached my maximum effect quickly. I got there first. Whereas if I were drug D, okay, not only did I get there first, look at this concentration. It's way less than D, who also took longer to get there, right? So this is a concentration that's going on down here at the bottom, all right? So I got here faster because I'm more to the left of my curve and my concentration is less. Versus here, it took more of that drug for me to get to the 100%. And I still got to the same spot as A. It just took more, okay? Yes?
Are there any situations that
Sometimes, yes. And being real with you, y'all, we're not gonna ever, like, once you get out of school, you're not gonna really touch this. This is helping you kind of understand the difference between efficacy and potency and the importance of them. This is more of something that you would see on like a research side, drug development side, which like I don't even typically deal with this. But this is how they get the doses that they get for us. This is how they say, hey, this is how you're gonna manipulate these medications, right? This is what they're looking at when they're going through those different phases. So utility, real world, like for, unless you go into research, you're not really gonna touch this often. But you will understand it if you see it. All right, this is, again, looking at the same exact thing, and let's talk about, we're looking at efficacy, okay? So I have my drug A, and I have drug B, and I see that my drug A is more potent because I have a lower concentration where I'm hitting my EC50, right? It's happening here. Also, I'm getting to my max quicker than drug B. And then also when we're looking at this, what am I gonna say in regards to efficacy? If this chart wasn't extended out, and I know it's saying that they have the same efficacy because this chart is kind of cut off. But if I were to look at this right here, and I didn't extend this out, would you say that this is the same exact efficacy? No, right? I would say that A is more effective than B, okay? Now, if I'm looking down here, right, I still see that A is more potent, right? I'm still getting to my EC50 quicker, but now we're the same. Now these two drugs are the same. So make sure that you're associating this with this graph, but here, efficacy is not the same. A is more effective, right? Because it's higher over here on your concentration side, okay? We good? We getting blank faces. I got this, okay. So, your effective therapeutic dose, again, more terminology. So this is where I'm getting at least 50% of the response that I would like to see from my population. So at least 50% of the people are saying, yep, this works, it's effective, let's go, all right? Toxic dose. This is essentially when you're expected to see toxicity. Again, the number is 50%. So all of these, we see that they're 50%, right? So toxicity, 50% of your population has gotten poisoned, essentially, okay? And then your lethal dose, did you kill them though, okay? 50% of the people died because they took this, right? So that's your lethal dose, toxic dose, effective dose. All at 50% of the population experiencing either lethality, toxicity, or effectiveness, okay? A lot of words, super simple if you think about what it's asking. All right, therapeutic index. We've been kind of talking about this. Don't need you to remember it to calculate it, the TD50 over ED50. But just understand that the higher the therapeutic index that we have for a drug, that is a safe drug. We're not going to have to monitor it as much as one of our meds that have a lower therapeutic index. Okay? Those that have a low therapeutic index, we usually are going to make sure that they're in that therapeutic window. We have lots of monitoring. You're going to have to watch your patient very, very closely to make sure that they don't end up in that lethality range that we just talked about. Okay? So essentially it's balancing that toxic with that lethal dose and trying to say, all right, where are we safe? So if I have a bigger window, I have more wiggle room to play around with, right? Or to accidentally give too much of a medication. Whereas if I have that smaller window, that narrow therapeutic index, I'm more likely to cause harm. Not as safe, more monitoring because it's not safe. okay? So one little mistake with a narrow therapeutic window, you're gonna see it. Versus if you have something that has a larger therapeutic window, more room to make a mistake. Not telling you to make a mistake, but it's more room. All right, receptors. Y'all know about receptors, you heard a lot about receptors, lock and key, probably heard that a lot too. So just make sure that when we're talking about our drugs, lots of drugs are gonna go into the body and they're gonna bind to some receptors, okay? Different types of drugs will have different binding properties. Sometimes they may not bind at all and we're putting them in the body to get some other type of desired effect, to keep another drug around longer, to get rid of a drug, different things. So not to say that every single drug has to bind to a receptor, but most of our drugs are binding to some type of receptor to do an action, okay? So when we look at this, this is again the same thing, like making sure that that key fits into that slot, and we have different types. We have agonist, partial agonist, antagonist, and inverse agonist, and we're gonna go over kind of what these look like, because we do have different classifications. So when we're looking at an agonist, just think about that as turning something on, right? I'm aggravating you. I am making that desired effect of what you want to happen, like I'm there, I'm present. On. Okay? So what I did was I made it like a remote control. Okay? If I were turning up the volume, that's an agonist, right? Especially a full agonist. It's like full blast. When you have your partial agonist, okay, it's turning up the volume but not that much. Like I tell my kids, keep it at 8. Mommy doesn't want the TV over 8. It's too loud. That's a partial agonist. The volume is still up. We can still hear it. It's just not full blast, full agonist. Okay? Now when I talk about an antagonist, I'm doing the opposite. Okay? Anytime you see ant and then whatever afterwards, it's doing the opposite of the agonist. Okay? So your antagonist now is saying, I don't want to hear it at all. Okay? We're done with it. Let's turn it down. Turn it down. I'm putting it on 1 now. Okay, like we turned it down. So you see that with this, I'm not gonna have, we're on 0 when I'm being an antagonist. We can't hear it, it's down. And whenever I think about being an antagonist, I'm just making sure that the agonist can't do its job. Okay, I'm making sure that we can't hear the TV. That is my job as an antagonist. That is that there is no volume. So act competitively or non-competitively, right? Do I have free reign to just be like, I have the remote and I'm not turning it back up and my finger gets to stay on down? Or is there somebody else who's also still there trying to press up? That's competitive antagonism. Because now I have to see who gets their press in first, right? It's kind of like when you're trying to let down the window and somebody else is pressing up. You kind of have to wait on them to let go before the window will move because it just stops, okay? So your antagonist is trying to make sure that action does not happen. An inverse agonist is very interesting. So when you're looking at the inverse agonist, it's binding to the same place that your agonist is going to bind to, but it's doing the opposite response. So the way that we can think of something, let me try to think of an antihistamine, all right? So I can have allergies and I'm taking an antihistamine. And I am going to get those levels down to where I'm not sounding and being miserable, right? I'm not congested. But I can continue to take that antihistamine year round, right? And it's still going to make it to where that level is not going to be causing like an allergic reaction if it happens. Now, if I have like a medication where I have high blood pressure and I take it and it's lowering my blood pressure, right? I don't just stop it once I get my blood pressure lowered. I continue to take it, and it's going to continue to keep my blood pressure, depending on my dose, safely lower. But as soon as I stop it, my body is going to do what it does and it's going to come back on, right? So an inverse agonist is gonna produce an action that is opposite of what an agonist would have done. Okay? So don't think of it as like the agonist continuing to turn up the volume. It's doing also the opposite. So the remote analogy is essentially having something to where it's blocking the transmission to the TV. So you know, like when that receiver, you can't turn the volume down because something is covering it. I do that to my kids sometimes. Like, oh, the TV must be broken. Cover the sensor. Oh, we got to turn it off and let it rest. Okay? Inverse agonist. Have to be creative. I don't want to fight with them. All right? And then what you see over time is that those receptors that we have, over time, they start to decrease. Okay? So decreases the number of activated receptors below its normal levels. Right? So now I'm not as sensitive to it. Okay, these are just pictures of what we just talked about. The only thing that we didn't talk about was allosteric binding. Allosteric is binding to a site that's different than where your agonist, your drug, what have you, was going to bind. It will bind to a different site on that receptor, cause a conformational change that can either make now that key not fit at all, or it's like, yes, come on, everybody come in, and it'll turn it on. And so that's where you see the allosteric activator versus the allosteric antagonist. The antagonist is like, nope, now you don't work. Whereas the activator is like, come on, everybody, we're all free, we're welcome. Bless you. Okay, so then looking at your, bless you, competitive antagonist. Again, this is like, who gets there first? Bless you. Hey, I can bless all day. All right, so competitive antagonist. This, you're thinking about reversibility, right? Who got there first? There's two people trying to get to one chair, musical chairs. Music stopped, who got there first? All right? If the antagonist got there, now my agonist can't do, or my drug can't do what I wanted it to do. Okay, but if it were able to get there first, then we're good, we're golden. But at some point, that antagonist is gonna get off of that receptor, and I can eventually bind as the agonist to that receptor. So that's why you see it reduces the potency of the agonist, but the efficacy is unaffected. And if I increase my dose, now there's more of me to get that chair. I'm likely to now win. Think about tug of war too, right? If I put more on one side than the other, so I can overcome competitive antagonists with putting a higher dose, more agonists, more of what I need to kind of beat them out. Okay, so that's competitive agonists. When you're looking at non-competitive, this is irreversible binding. So now the efficacy is reduced because once I have bound as that antagonist to that receptor, it's done. You're not getting me off, I'm not going anywhere. Now, what do I do as the drug? I have nowhere to go, so I get eliminated. So now my potency is not as good, okay? So less receptors are available, so therefore my desired response, my effectiveness has now gone down. I can't overcome it with a higher dose like I could with my competitive antagonist, okay? The dose won't matter. Indirect agonists, we went over this already. There's some examples, we're gonna talk about these, but again, there are also some that will say, hey, I'm gonna stop this action from happening. We'll touch on this. So we'll talk about acetylcholinesterase enzymes, and what those do is they degrade acetylcholine, and then you have an acetylcholinesterase inhibitor, which stops the acetylcholinesterase. And so we'll talk about like all of these different things and how they essentially are helping now our acetylcholine, which is what we want depending on what we're trying to target, but now helping our acetylcholine last longer. Okay, so an inverse agonist or an indirect agonist is what I meant to say. Sorry, indirect agonist. All right, I'm helping acetylcholine, but not by directly acting on that acetylcholine. I'm gonna get a desired effect, but not because I actually helped acetylcholine. I did it in the background. Okay, I didn't let acetylcholine know I was helping it out. This is just talking about different receptors. Y'all have gone over receptors, G-coupled protein receptors. You're gonna hear about these. We'll talk about different ones. We definitely will talk about your beta adrenergic receptor. We'll talk about that, but that's probably the big one. We talk about alphas as well. So you'll see these come up. Just understand that there are different receptors that have interactions, and if there aren't enough receptors there for our drugs to work, we may not see that effect that we want to see. Our potency may end up going down. And then depending on how that drug interacts with that receptor, we get different responses. So this will be like our mechanisms of action that we'll talk about. I will tell you what they're binding to, and then we'll talk about like what that receptor is, if there is a receptor. Sometimes it might be an actual tissue directly and not necessarily dealing with some of these receptors. So we'll talk about it. Desensitization. So this is essentially telling you that over time, I continue to like poke, and you're like, you know what? It's like you're not even there. Okay, you're desensitized. So think about like a sibling, if you have an annoying sibling, and they're just always like in your space, always around, and you're like, I'm just gonna start ignoring you. It's like you're not even here anymore. Okay, I had enough. I see you. I got it. Bless you. But it's always around, so therefore you have like eventually a decrease in the excitement that you're experiencing from it, okay? I got a new pool in my backyard. Yay, at first you're in it, and then after a while you're like, ugh, that pool is back there, and now we have to clean it. Desensitized, not as excited. Also what you see is that the receptors go down, right? So in your picture on the left, you see we have more receptors. Over time, because of the desensitization, I have less receptors. You know how we have Bengay and like those topical muscle rubs? That's the idea sometimes behind those. They're trying to desensitize that nerve so that it's not painful to you anymore. And then the receptors get downregulated. So then the pain goes away, because now I don't have receptors sending the signal to my brain to say this hurts. Okay? So desensitization. Supersensitivity. So when you're looking at supersensitivity, this is like it's creating another exit door, all right? So without looking at all the words you see on our picture, we have upregulation now. I'm sensitive to it. I'm sensitive to you being here, okay? So instead of my 3 little receptors, now I have 2 more that join the party, okay? So when you see this, due to receptors being subjected to continuous or repeated exposure to receptor antagonists. So now I'm like, all right, we need to find another way around this. What do? I create more. Okay, so upregulation. And then looking at your non-receptor medications, remember how I told you like not all of our drugs are going to have a receptor that they're binding to do their effect. Some of them we have where they don't get absorbed at all. So we'll look at these as we go through them, but examples you have are laxatives. When you have a laxative, it's just going through to draw the water out. It's not necessarily binding, it's using a gradient. And so that's one example. Your chemical antagonist, looking at like your protamine sulfate. So if I gave too much heparin or I overdose a patient on heparin and I don't want them to bleed out, I can then get protamine in there and it's gonna bind with the actual drug. It's gonna bind with the heparin, not necessarily a receptor, right, in my body. So that's another way where we have a drug, it's doing something, but it's not necessarily binding to our body, it's binding to another drug, okay? So we'll go over some of these, you'll see these examples in some of our drugs as we go through our different semesters. All right, these are the same exact questions, so our like absorbs like. Are drugs bound to proteins active? No. And then what affects how long it takes to reach our steady state? Half-life, right? And then what affected our half-life? Median. Okay, what was our loading dose? What did it do? Right? Concentration. What happens to concentration with longer intervals? More or less fluctuations? More fluctuations. And what types of antagonists are there? Competitive and non-competitive. Which one can I give a higher dose and overcome my antagonist? Competitive, right? Non-competitive, they win. Can't compete. all right? And then make sure you're reviewing this chart as well, understanding what's happening with your prodrug in the presence of an inducer or an inhibitor, right? It's not gonna get, in the presence of an inducer, I'm gonna have more of that drug being pushed out, okay? And then what happens to my side effects, because now I have more drug being pushed out, more active drug, my side effects is gonna go up. Whereas if I had my inhibitor, I'm stopping that active drug from being formed altogether, and therefore I'm probably not gonna have my therapeutic effect that I need. So then risk of therapeutic failure, okay? All right, let's start our next lecture. And then do our, so that way we'll at least have the background done. Parasympathetic. Where is it? Okay. All right. Okay, so have y'all touched on parasympathetic, sympathetic nervous system? All right, we're gonna go over a little bit of review, kind of get your mind back into that realm, bless you, and then we'll talk about different medications that are gonna work. We're probably not gonna get into a lot of the medications, more so the background today. All right, your ELOs are listed there, and then a little background about what we know. So, what is the parasympathetic nervous system responsible for? Like, what is it controlling?
Rest and digest.
Rest and digest, right? Fight or flight is who? Sympathetic, okay? What is my main neurotransmitter that I'm talking about when I'm looking at my parasympathetic? Okay? Common side effects of my cholinergic, wet or dry? So my cholinergic agonist, right? So my dumbbells. Side effects of my cholinergic antagonist. All right. What drug class is used for Alzheimer's disease? Huh? Well, okay. So this is. But here's another thing that I want y'all to remember too. When I'm saying a class versus a drug, remember how we talked about this initially? Because I want you to understand that, and some of your questions will be worded this way for your exam. Understand when we're talking about a class versus when I'm asking you about an actual drug. Okay? So the class is just at like my cholinergic agonist. I can then go down and tell you a specific drug, and there may be several different subclasses within the class. And because this is your first lecture with all the drugs in it, I went through and I made all of your charts for you. So you'll see all of the charts on here. And then and when I get to it, I'll show you. That's how I think you should, and a lot of people study for the exams and might successfully try to study for the exams. So that when you see the question, you can visualize it. The other thing that I was telling y'all about this was that because this is your first exam, right? So all of that what we just went over is like over 50% almost of your exam of the previous lectures. This is just, and I will give you guys a breakdown. I'll give you probably a breakdown of how many questions are going to come from each lecture, okay? But these are now your drugs, okay? The way that your brain needs to start working now is not going to be as straightforward as all the words that we were talking about before, all right? So group them however you need to group them, quiz each other however you need to quiz each other. Off of soapbox, back to our pre-knowledge check. Cholinergic agonist is our class. And then when we're looking at our Parkinson's, we're going to talk about our anti-cholinergics, and then we'll go over the specific drugs that we talk about. Another thing that I want to point out, when you go through this, I tried to put what you will typically hear something called as well. So cholinergic antagonists can also be called anticholinergics. You will hear them used interchangeably. Okay, so I try to make sure that I put both so that until your brain gets used to hearing all the things. All right, this is just a picture again. Parasympathetic is what we're talking about. Coming from our CNS, we'll get some type of stimuli, and then our neurotransmitter will be released. It's going to go through that neuron. It's going to say, all right, I am going to affect this muscle or this tissue. Okay, that is what our drugs are doing. And then understanding with this picture, I'm simply just trying to get you to remember rest, digest, and then fight or flight, okay? Main neurotransmitter that we're gonna be talking about is our acetylcholine, okay? There's several different things that are involved in this channeling, and the signal that gets our reaction, or the signal, or the drug that is trying to mimic one of these hormones, okay? We also have our indirect agonists that are gonna help our acetylcholine stay around for a little bit longer, so we'll talk about some of those meds as well. So the big thing that I want you to know here is that there are several different neurotransmitters. The one that we're gonna be focusing on is your acetylcholine, okay? This was just giving you a picture of essentially what's happening, right? So our signal is gonna come down, and it's from our CNS, and then it's gonna go along this neuron, and then you see where it is going to cross the synapse, because we have our acetylcholine that will be released, and then it's gonna bind a nicotinic cholinergic receptor. Further travel down the synapse, down this neuron, and then it's gonna get secreted again to, this is my effector organ, or like my target organ, okay? So I now see that I have muscarinic cholinergic receptors. We're focusing on the top part right now. This is also what you're gonna see when we do our sympathetic nervous system as well, but it's just letting you kind of compare the two. The initial synapse that we're crossing is gonna be that nicotinic cholinergic receptor that we're binding to, but now you see here, we have different receptors that we bind to depending on which, what we're dealing with, whether it's parasympathetic or sympathetic nervous system, right? So here I have adrenergic receptors, whereas here I'm dealing with my muscarinic. And we'll go over some of this stuff as we keep going. All right, so acetylcholine, remembering that, again, this is our main neurotransmitter that we have, and it's specifically when we're talking about trying to receive that signal from the CNS to say, all right, go hit this target organ and I need you to do this, okay, whatever that is. When we see this, and when we were looking at this picture, right, I've come down this neuron, and then I have acetylcholine stores, right? So all of these different acetylcholine are just floating around. My signal says, all right, I need you to release the acetylcholine. You see here that we have several different binding sites, and then there's also a negative feedback system that will go in and turn off and say, hey, I'm done, I don't need any more acetylcholine, okay? So this is that negative feedback system right here, by the M that you see, that M receptor, okay? So here, I go postsynaptically and I say, there's an M receptor. I'm gonna bind to that because this is my effector cell, so I can get some type of response. I have an N receptor as well that can help me with that effect. And then presynaptically, I can say, hey, there's a lot of acetylcholine floating out here. Then it starts to bind to that M receptor here, and it'll say, no more. Stop secreting the acetylcholine. I don't need it. I have enough here. Okay? So that's the negative feedback system that you see. So here's my acetylcholinesterase right here. This is going to also terminate the actions of my acetylcholine. It's going to make it stop doing what it needs to do. Okay? But I also have an acetylcholinesterase inhibitor, which will bind to this acetylcholinesterase and say, leave my acetylcholine alone. I need it to stay around. Okay? So the acetylcholinesterase is trying to terminate the action of my acetylcholine, but now I also have something that's bigger than my acetylcholinesterase. I have an acetylcholinesterase inhibitor to say, leave my acetylcholine alone. Let it do this thing. Okay? So we're going to see this again, but now that's what this is telling you down here, right? So your acetylcholinesterase is breaking down your acetylcholine, but then I have an acetylcholinesterase inhibitor which says, hey, leave it alone. So your acetylcholinesterase inhibitor goes to your acetylcholinesterase and stops it. So just remember the name, acetylcholinesterase inhibitor is what is stopping your acetylcholinesterase. So stops acetylcholine, go acetylcholine. Oh, that sound like Miss Rachel. Sorry, y'all, I'm traumatized. I hear her in my sleep. All right, this is a good summary slide for you to kind of review receptors and kind of understand what receptors you're going to be hearing about when you're looking at each nervous system. So your sympathetic, this will go over that, we'll talk about that, but your parasympathetic, you see we're talking about cholinergic, we have acetylcholine, we have nicotinic receptors, and we have muscarinic receptors that we're going to talk about. That's our sites of action. There's different ones in 1 through and 5. We're going to break down what those subtypes do, those subtypes receptors do, because different drugs will bind to those to get responses, okay? So depending on which subtype it has an affinity for, it will get that response because it's going to go and bind to that end receptor, okay? And acetylcholine is the big neurotransmitter that's doing all of this, right? So our big focus. All right, so when we're looking at our muscarinic receptors, M1 through M5, those are the ones that are going to be like more so on our target organs or our effector cells like we saw before, right, in the pictures. So those are where we're going to bind to, typically postsynaptically, but remember I showed you one that was presynaptic as well, that was doing the negative feedback to say, hey, I don't need it anymore, I stopped the acetylcholine, right? So that's why you see pre and postsynaptic, but it's in several different tissues. When you're looking at your nicotinic receptors, you see that these are at the end of those muscular plates. So you can see them postsynaptically, the NM, and then your NN are at your junctions, which are also postsynaptic. So a good picture showing that would be like this. So these are nicotinic receptors here, and then sometimes you also will have them here on your postsynaptics as well, okay? Here, you can see it here, and then sometimes we'll see it, it's not in this picture, but up here in that other synapse, that the first synapse that it had to cross, the signal had to cross, okay? So just kind of be aware, because you're gonna hear these when we're looking at our mechanisms, you're gonna hear these receptors. So if you need to refer to it, I kind of added this in here as a summary for you guys to kind of go back to and say like, okay, where is this working? Where is this happening at? All right, these are the subtypes that I was talking to you about. I only want you to focus on the ones that are in the box, because M4, M5, like we don't really know a whole lot about them. Probably as time goes on and we get older, they'll start to discover more. But right now we're focusing on M1, 2, and 3. When you're looking at these, again, this is where our acetylcholine is going to bind to these receptors to relay that signal and have that effector cell do whatever it is that we're needing it to do. So M1 is in our nerves, it's in our salivary glands, stomach. You see your M2 in the heart, smooth muscles, bladder for your M3, also your M2. So just when you hear these and you see these receptors that they're hitting, kind of go back and say, all right, where are you working? What's going on? What were you doing? And this is a good summary slide where you can kind of see what the drugs that hit these in subtypes would be doing, okay? It'll help your mechanisms make sense. So, parasympathetic nervous system, fight or flight, rest or digest. Rest and digest, right? So the way that I try to remember it is the parasympathetic nervous system is trying to preserve energy. Whereas when we talk about our sympathetic nervous system, it's just out there like, sorry, but I gotta go. I gotta get out of here. The location that we're looking at, again, this stems more from our cranial and our sacral area. Y'all are gonna get that somewhere else. Our neurotransmitter that we've been talking about, acetylcholine, a main effector cell receptors that we're talking about, nicotinic, muscarinic, right? And then our neurotransmitter pathway. So this was just to kind of help you remember some of the terms. When we're looking at our neurotransmitter pathway, this is going to be cholinergic, okay? That's our pathway. Good job. Okay, this is what I was telling you about, kind of trying to break things up so you can see what you're looking at. So we have our cholinergic agents, and we have two different branches of our cholinergic agents. We have our agonists and we have our antagonists. So I put all of your agonists in green and all of your antagonists are in red, okay? And then, because your agonists are making things go, right? And your antagonist is stopping something, okay? So then you have direct and indirect. And then in your indirect, you have competitive and non-competitive. When we talk about competitive, we're saying I can reverse that, right? Whereas our non-competitive, it was irreversible, I was stuck, right? We just talked about that, we were looking at our receptors. So when we're looking at our cholinergic antagonists, again, competitive and non-competitive, same type of idea. So this would be a, before the test, like, hey, can I go back and put all of the drugs where they actually belong on here in their class, okay? Like fill in the drug names that are gonna go next to them. And you'll see what I mean by that. So like, this is just your blank tree branch right now, okay? Then you'll start to build on this and say, all right, what drugs actually fall into a direct acting agent? What drug actually falls into an indirect acting agent, okay? So if you want to print this out and then like start writing names on the side of it so that you can keep up with it and see it, I like to see stuff on one page. I love one page, okay? So that's how I would look at this to try to keep it in your brain and fresh in your brain. So looking at our cholinergic agents that you have, remember we talked about agonists, right? An agonist is going to alter something, right? I can increase or decrease the activity of that normal neurotransmitter that's happening. So you're mimicking something when we're talking about a pure agonist. Your indirect agonist was, again, I'm like helping you but in the background, right? So I'm prolonging the action of whatever that neurotransmitter is. I'm helping it, but it doesn't know that I'm helping it, right? And then your antagonists are gonna do the opposite. So when we're talking about this, you're gonna look at your anticholinergics, antimuscarinics, anti-nicotine, anti, okay? So several different ways that we can say, hey, this is an antagonist. So I put all of the different words in ways that you can see or hear somebody say them, okay? So this is what I was telling you about trying to fill it in, but I'm doing it more zoomed in. But on a one pager of like, you're putting all of these different things. So I went out on the side and I said, okay, cholinergic agents, side effects, they're wet, right? They're gonna wet things. So I have this up here, and then I'm looking at my my agonist, and I'm like, okay, I have direct agonist, I got my indirect agonist. Okay, my indirect agonist means my inhibitors, right? My acetylcholinesterase inhibitors, because I'm helping you, but in the background helping you. So I have my competitive and I have my non-competitives, okay? And then here are my direct acting agonists that I have, and then I listed these all here. Okay, so you know where everything falls. This is how a lot of students say they study and that it helps them. And it's very clean for these slide decks, but as you go on, you'll see that like some meds and some of your drug classes, like they don't match up. It's not like they have all the same side effects. This is good because they typically like they have the same side effects, right? So if I'm talking about a cholinergic agonist, I know that my side effect is going to be dumbbells. Things are going to get wet. Those are my main side effects. And then I can go in and say, all right, what specifically do I need to look at here for this drug? Okay? So as we keep going, I'll show you what I mean. So side effects, we already talked about these. So just think about things being wet and slow down when you're talking about a cholinergic agonist. Because you're going to have bradycardia, you're going to have issues breathing, okay? I'm going to have urination. When you talk about meiosis, that's like constriction, right, of the eye. So wet and slow is how I like to remember my cholinergic agonist, okay? Sweating, drooling, looking like a little bulldog. My big uses, okay? So think about any condition where something is dry and I need to make it wet. Okay, so that's how I remember it. So if I had an anticholinergic overdose, I gave them too much of an agent that dried them out, I need to reverse that, I'm gonna give them a cholinergic agonist or an agonist, right? So that I can get things back wet. So that's how I try to think about these. Glaucoma, okay? Depending on what type of glaucoma they have, they're gonna have a lot of pressure and fluid in their eye. and I need it to come out. So now I actually need these tears. I need all of that fluid to be washed out, get rid of it, so that I can decrease the pressure that they have. Xerostomia or dry mouth, depending on what type of diseases some patients have, and even sometimes when we're treating patients for cancer, you'll see this a lot, and so we can see if we give them medications, if it will help kind of lubricate their mouth again. Patients who have issues with using the restroom or they don't have a lot of peristalsis in the GI tract, we'll see that we'll give them some of these meds to make them go. If we give them too much, they'll go a lot, okay? And then we have to back off on our meds, so that's kind of a good utilization of this GU as well, where our patients aren't able to use the restroom, okay? And so this kind of helps them make things wet, help them urinate, right? Because that was our side effects. So your uses are essentially everything that we talked about that was a side effect. If there's a condition that they can't do those things, they can't make anything wet, they can't cry, they can't lubricate their mouth because they don't have saliva, this is going to be the drug that we're going to give them. Alzheimer's disease, so the idea with this, we'll talk about this a little bit, but the idea is that we think that it is associated with a loss in acetylcholine, so therefore we're trying to keep acetylcholine around, we're going to replenish it with our agonist, right, with our drug. So that's the idea behind why we use these drugs for that. And then at the neuromuscular junction, you can use it for myasthenia gravis, and it reverses curare, which is a toxin, and we'll talk about that. It comes from a plant, and what it does is it causes paralysis, and it stops people's muscles from working. So if your muscles aren't working, i.e. your heart or your lungs, you're gonna die. So very good medications to have around. And then we'll start here, time for y'all to go to lunch. So we'll start here on Monday? All right.